Palm Beach, a paradise of sun-drenched beaches and swaying palm trees. A playground for the rich and famous. But even in paradise, darkness can lurk. This is the story of Austin Herff. A story of how a life filled with promise could be twisted into something monstrous. The locals still remember the name Austin Herff, but not with fondness. They remember the fear. They remember the violence. Most of all, they remember the chilling realization that the darkness resided not in some unknown monster, but in someone they thought they knew. Austin Herff was not always a monster. He was once a bright, charming young man, full of life and potential. He had a loving family, a promising future. But something changed. The light within him dimmed, replaced by a growing darkness. It began subtly, a creeping unease, a shift in his demeanor. But it wasn't long before the changes became impossible to ignore. The sun still shone on Palm Beach, but a shadow had fallen over Austin Herff, a shadow that would soon consume him entirely, leaving behind only a shell of the man he once was. Austin Herff had it all: good looks, wealth, a future paved with gold. He was the product of a privileged upbringing in Palm Beach, the envy of his peers. His life was a series of successes, each achievement seemingly effortless. He excelled in school, charming teachers and classmates alike. He was a star athlete, his name a regular fixture in the local sports pages. Life was a beach, literally, for young Austin. He spent his days surfing, his evenings at lavish parties. His life was the embodiment of the carefree Palm Beach lifestyle. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. The first cracks in Austin's facade were subtle. His easy smile became less frequent, replaced by a brooding intensity. His grades began to slip. He withdrew from his friends and family, preferring solitude to company. His parents, initially attributing his behavior to the capriciousness of youth, grew increasingly concerned. Their golden boy was changing, and not for the better. The change in Austin was more than just teenage angst. It was a slow, insidious descent into madness. His once sharp mind became clouded with paranoia and delusion. The whispers started subtly, whispers that grew into roars in the silence of his own mind. He saw conspiracies lurking in the shadows. He believed that he was being watched, followed, controlled. The idyllic life of Palm Beach became a menacing labyrinth in his mind. Every face held a secret threat. Every smile was a smirk of mockery. The world, once a playground, transformed into a battleground where he was the primary target. Doctors were called in, therapists consulted, but Austin's descent into madness continued unabated. Diagnoses were offered, medications prescribed, but nothing seemed to pierce the impenetrable wall of delusion that had grown around him. He retreated further into himself, isolating himself from the very people who were desperately trying to help. Austin's behavior became increasingly erratic. His once charming personality was now prone to violent outbursts. He railed against unseen enemies, his words a jumbled mix of paranoia and fear. The whispers had become screams, driving him further into the abyss of madness. He saw threats everywhere, in the rustling of leaves, in the chirping of birds, in the innocent glances of strangers. His family, once the object of his affection, became targets of his suspicion. He accused them of being part of the conspiracy, his love twisted into a paranoid hatred. He pushed them away, his fear a palpable force that suffocated their attempts to reach him. The once happy home became a place of tension and fear. The laughter was gone, replaced by the chilling silence of unspoken anxieties and the echoes of Austin's tormented outbursts. The storm that had been brewing in Austin's mind finally broke. Fueled by his delusions, he committed an act so horrific, so unimaginable, that it shattered the tranquility of Palm Beach forever. The details of that night are too gruesome to recount, the violence too shocking to comprehend. What was once a vibrant young man, full of promise, had become a vessel of unimaginable violence. The darkness that had been festering inside him finally erupted, leaving a trail of blood and tears in its wake. The golden boy, the star athlete, the charmer, was gone. In his place stood a monster, driven by madness and fueled by delusions that had twisted his reality into something dark and monstrous. The idyllic facade of Palm Beach was ripped apart, revealing the raw, primal terror that lurked beneath the surface. The community, once a sanctuary of wealth and privilege, was now united by fear and disbelief. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the machinery of the legal system ground into motion. Austin Herff, the monster who had once been their golden boy, was arrested and charged. But the question that haunted everyone, from the investigators to the community, was could he be held accountable for his actions? The law, with its rigid definitions of sanity and culpability, seemed ill-equipped to grapple with the enormity of the tragedy. The trial became a media circus, the courtroom packed with curious onlookers and seasoned journalists alike. Expert witnesses debated the nature of Austin's illness, his sanity the subject of intense scrutiny. Was he a victim of his own broken mind, a puppet controlled by the delusions that tormented him? Or was he a calculating monster, hiding behind the mask of insanity to escape the consequences of his actions? The jury, tasked with deciding his fate, faced an impossible dilemma. The idyllic facade of Palm Beach, once a symbol of carefree affluence, was irrevocably shattered. The horrors that unfolded in their midst left an indelible mark on the community's collective psyche. The whispers continued, but they were no longer confined to Austin's tormented mind. They echoed through the manicured streets and behind the high walls of the opulent mansions. The fear lingered, a palpable presence that cast a long shadow over the once carefree paradise. Parents held their children a little tighter, their eyes scanning the faces of strangers with newfound suspicion. The carefree laughter of children playing on the beach seemed a little less innocent, their games tinged with the unspoken anxieties of the adults around them. The Herff family, once the picture of affluence and happiness, was torn apart by the tragedy. The weight of their son's actions crushed them, leaving them grappling with a grief so profound, so multifaceted, that it defied description. They were parents mourning the loss of their son, even as they were bound by the horrifying knowledge that he was responsible for so much pain. The guilt was a heavy burden to bear. Had they missed the signs? Could they have done something? Anything? To prevent the tragedy? The questions haunted them, offering no solace, no escape from the labyrinth of their grief. Their once happy home became a shrine to their shattered dreams, each room filled with painful reminders of the life they once had. The laughter, the love, the shared moments of joy, all gone, replaced by a silence so profound that it was deafening. The question of Austin Herff's culpability remained a subject of heated debate long after the trial concluded. Was he a monster, a cold-blooded killer who deserved to be punished for his crimes? Or was he a victim, a young man robbed of his sanity by an illness he couldn't control? The legal system, with its black and white definitions of guilt and innocence, seemed woefully inadequate to address the complexities of his case. He remained an enigma, a tragic figure caught between the realms of sanity and madness, accountability and victimhood. The debate surrounding his case extended far beyond the confines of the courtroom, forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths about mental illness, criminal responsibility, and the limits of our understanding of the human psyche. Was Austin Herff a monster or a victim? Perhaps he was both, a tragic embodiment of the duality that can exist within a single human being. The tragedy of Austin Herff served as a stark reminder that mental illness can afflict anyone, regardless of their socioeconomic status, their upbringing, or their zip code. It shattered the illusion that wealth and privilege could shield us from the complexities of the human mind, from the darkness that can lurk within us all. Austin's story forced society to confront its own prejudices and misconceptions surrounding mental illness. It highlighted the inadequacy of the systems in place to address the needs of those struggling with mental health issues. The lack of resources, the stigma, the fear. In the aftermath of the tragedy, there were calls for reform, for increased funding for mental health services, for greater awareness, for compassion. The legacy of Austin Herff was not one of answers, but of questions. Questions that challenged us to confront our own biases, our own fears, our own capacity for both good and evil.